So, as promised, I said I would do like the Linus Tech Tips video. And so I think the best way to do this is basically a thing by thing reaction, and maybe I'll like do the best bits whatever as I go. So,
But if what you want is a simple, painless gaming experience, then let this be a cautionary tale. One of trials, tribulations, and of course, sponsors.
okay. So, it's not wrong. So I've had issues with things like when it comes to like setting up my gaming stuff that like I've run into. So, just so you know, yeah, it's not painless, but it is less painful than it was a decade ago by far. So, just throwing that out there.
It's funny because I assumed that this challenge would be more painful for me than it would be for Luke. I mean, after all, he has years of Linux experience while I came in with basically none. But here's the thing.
Gaming, if your Linux experience is primarily working with, programs like doing system administration stuff, then yes. If you're trying to do something that you've never done before in it, then it's going to be a little bit different, and yeah, you have to run around. Their thing with the advanced users not being able to do stuff makes sense, because even some of the more advanced ones, you have to work around some proprietary things that aren't very open.
I'm mostly by myself as a way to relax or to hang out with my kids, and I am extremely flexible about what game I'll play. If something doesn't work, screw it, I'll just play something else. Luke, on the other hand, whose social circle is deeply immersed in gaming culture, has so much more on the line if he can't solve a problem.
Yeah, like I literally had a friend ask, "Hey dude, when are you gonna be back?" Obviously, I had never actually left, but I was a lot more difficult to include as a lot of competitive games that have anti-cheat just don't work. Or it took me so long to get a lot of games to a satisfactory level that by the time I was ready, everyone else was just done.
Okay, so this is a point. Anti-cheat on Linux, still very early. A lot of developers have foregone the option of enabling anti-cheat in Linux for whatever reason, even though it's available, and they would have such good feedback from like many of these people that know what they're doing. I mean, I'm not going to include myself in that for knowing everything that I'm doing, but there are other people out there that know for sure what they're doing and could provide very good, like, detailed information about like what happened and what went wrong, and like some of the trace calls to help the developers get it fixed even faster. And these developers have foregone that opportunity of free debugging labor. And even some of this debugging stuff that Linux users do has helped the experience on Windows become even better. But again, these other developers that aren't used to this have foregone that completely. So that's part of the issue, is the developers not willing to take the jump and risk it. And I guess on some extent you can argue that it's like, well, the user base isn't there to do it. But at the same time, the user base may not be there, but the quality of the user base that you're jumping into may help your product become better without you having to invest the money into doing it for it to become quicker, and less money to invest in doing it through the labor.
Gaming for the night. And as a lot of my friends like to just try random games out for fun, this actually happened a lot.
Our goal is not to spread FUD about the state of Linux gaming though, so it's time to get specific about some of our less good experiences. First up is Steam, or rather, not Steam. Valve's goal of reaching 100% compatibility with the entire Steam game library is admirable. Actually, incredible. As noted by this here Reddit post, the Steam game library is chock full of amazing gaming experience.
Okay, so back up to that one where it says like most of your gaming using Linux. It is very bold to say that, considering the amount of effort that Valve has put into Proton and the compatibility there. There are a lot of games I just play through Proton, like Vanilla Skyrim, like old Rim, works really perfectly in Proton. Oh, Special Edition is kind of iffy because I've had some crashes here and there that I've had issues with. And I believe currently I'm using the Glorious Eggroll build of Proton. But those are some things where it's like very, very like bold. And considering the thing with, Mini Galaxy, which is basically a GOG Galaxy client built for Linux in essence. It kind of fills that Galaxy thing with like letting you know of when you have updates and things like that for your different games and letting you update them without having like all the extra features that the new Galaxy has, like the chat and everything else. But it still lets you play those games, and it has some like very basic wine support for it. So you can play your Windows games in Mini Galaxy, but you're not going to have the same tweaks that you're going to have with Lutris doing the same thing. So if you're playing a majority of your games on Lutris, then you're probably like playing wine games in Lutris from GOG or some of these other services that you can connect into Lutris. Otherwise, you're probably using Steam, which is the more favored game client out there. And yeah, Steam works pretty well. A lot of people like use Steam for all of their games.
From AAA studios and indie developers alike. But it's also not the silver bullet that it would have been 10 or even 5 years ago, when nearly every game worth playing was available on Steam.
Half of Twitch's top 20 games, at least at the time of filming this, are not on Steam. And I know being a popular game to stream doesn't necessarily mean it's popular with random gamers out there, but these are all very big name games. And being on Steam isn't an automatic win either. Look at Apex Legends and New World. Both massive games, both listed as borked on ProtonDB.
Okay, so keep in mind that ProtonDB is basically for like many of these Steam tweaks. You're trying to run it through Steam, which Steam does support running many games through Proton. You can run a lot of programs through Proton. But does it work for everything? No. Sometimes you need to do those finer tweaks. And that's where Lutris comes in and helps make some of those tweaking easier. Otherwise, you're using something like Proton Tricks to do it for you to make the Proton prefix work. Whereas Lutris basically has the wine tricks and everything that lets you easily access it without going through a third-party whatever that you have to install separately. You can access it all from there, and yes, you have to install a third-party application, but it's easily accessible from within Lutris, which is a difference. So it may be borked on ProtonDB, but is it borked on Lutris, or can you get it somewhat working there? Because Proton hacks are going to be slightly different than what the wine hacks that are going to be in Lutris. So you're kind of looking at it from this one angle, and yes, Twitch's client is not available, and I haven't seen any Twitch alternative client for running your games from Twitch. So yes, they may not be available. You may have to do some extra tweaking otherwise to make that run.
Native Linux games are obviously going to be your best bet. Want to try one of my personal favorites, Crosscode? Click Install, click Play, and as simple as that. I mean, I was amazed at how painlessly my Xbox One controller worked. Though I should note that I stuck with a wired connection rather than trying to tackle getting the unofficial XOW driver working.
Okay, controllers for the most part work pretty well. Let me mute my Discord. So, controllers, basically a lot of them have been pretty well implemented, and Valve has worked really hard to make a lot of controllers work out of the box with Steam. So Valve, when you install Steam, will provide a lot of those drivers for controllers so that they should just work, basically. I've had my Switch controller work just fine, and it's wired. I basically go with a wired controller for the most part, unless I'm using my Steam controller. So yeah, those controllers are basically going to work right out of the box, pretty much, for the most part. Some of them aren't all in there. As new controllers come out, they have to add them as people try them out. But for the most part, in Linux, you're going to have someone that may know what they're doing, and hopefully the person that has that controller that's trying it out knows how to make that work, and then Valve can pull from that and use that.
Working. Valheim, meanwhile, ran amazingly and immediately, demonstrating how even smaller developers can make it work if they've got the will.
In addition to that, while not necessarily native, I played Legion TD2, Towerfall Ascension, Faster Than Light, Slay the Spire, Path of Exile, and Rust, and they all worked perfectly with zero actual.
Okay, so Rust, I think, has a native binary. Path of Exile, no. FTL has a native binary, and I think Towerfall has a native one as well. Slay the Spire, I'm not sure of. But yeah, a lot of the older games that are going to run through Proton are going to work pretty well right out of the box.
Actual effort. And interestingly enough, Dota 2 and CSGO both had completely game-breaking problems that weren't isolated to my system during the challenge.
This is pretty normal. Like, a lot of people have problems that, like, aren't just your system. I've had things that are just my system, but a lot of times things that are just my system are sometimes things that I overlook in configuration, which for a new user is not very welcoming.
They seem to be solved now, but it goes to show that just like with Windows, because a piece of software was made for it, doesn't mean it's actually going to be perfect.
This point goes into, the fact that a lot of people, they optimize their Windows build because that's what they're building from, but they basically export to Linux build and hope that it works well. And they don't know how to optimize for Linux, which is part of the problem where some of these bigger studios don't want to learn something new, and so they stick with what they know. And what's sad is what they know, which is Windows, is continuing to change and evolve over time, so that it is becoming more breaking. And now what they're used to, and what has basically been the same for decades, is now changing right under them.
I didn't have any issues running CSGO. Even got me some kills, boys. But I did notice significantly more stutters than I'm used to seeing on this class of hardware. That could be an Nvidia driver.
Yeah, it's probably an Nvidia driver thing. I have the same problem. Like, my Nvidia cards, basically. My RTX 3050, I have some stutter issues on Linux, and that's probably due to the early, build of the drivers and the newness of the hardware somewhat. But it's partially probably also down to Nvidia not, doing things. And for the most part, Nvidia runs a little bit worse, the proprietary driver, and even the open source driver, the Novo driver for Nvidia cards, doesn't run all that well. But part of that is due to the fact that Nvidia doesn't exactly support it like AMD does with their now open sourced drivers that they let the community help them develop. And I think improvement between both Windows and Linux would improve if Nvidia would follow the same suit and open source their driver.
Issue, or it could be something else entirely, but for me, it worked well enough that I didn't feel like digging any further into that rabbit hole. Not when I could be digging for a sweet hoodie like this one on lttstore.com instead.
The next tier is Windows native games that Valve officially lists as Linux capable via Steam Play. But before we go any further, I just want to say massive respect to the incredible teams who have worked tirelessly to make running Windows games on Linux possible. Valve's Proton compatibility layer is amazing. It's forked from Wine, which has been multiple decades in the making, with about half of its source code written by volunteers. That's freaking wild.
Yeah, so Wine's been around for quite a while, and it's nice to see all these cool hacks that Valve put in be pushed into Wine as well. So having Valve support from there, and knowing that some of those Valve developers came from Microsoft too is like, they understand how the system really works from the inside. And Gabe came from Microsoft as well, so it's really cool to see that like these people are helping the Wine Project and volunteering with doing that as well. Okay, so this bunch of videos I decided to turn into multiple parts because they're like all 15-minute chunks, so the upload schedule may be a little bit different, but hopefully it's good and like it doesn't like put a full big thing into your face. So yeah, you know where the links are, and look out for the next part, and I will see you guys later.